everyone so much for joining us today. I always have a lot of fun presenting these webinars and they're always really great information. So thank you to our presenters, Pam and Janelle, for putting this on for us today. Just a couple of rules. Let me admit one more person. There we go. So as we get settled, I am going to force mute everyone. You will not be able to unmute yourselves. Please leave any questions and comments in the chat box. And for the people on Facebook Live, I will be monitoring Facebook chat for questions as well, so feel free to drop questions in the chat. I do have a disclaimer from Porzio that they want me to read out as well. So thank you for attending today's webinar. With respect to the information provided by the attorneys from Porzio, Bromberg & Newman, PC, please note that this webinar is not to be construed as an offer to represent you and is for information purposes only. Neither our presentation of such information nor your receipt of it creates an attorney-client relationship. Please also note that unless you are already a client of our firm, the act of sending electronic mail to our firm will not create an attorney-client relationship or impose any obligation on Porzio, Bromberg & Newman PC or any of its lawyers. Any electronic communication between the panelists and the viewers will not be privileged, may not be secure, and may be disclosed to other persons unless the viewer officially retains the law firm. So with that disclaimer out of the way, again, thank you so much for putting this on for us today, and I will hand it over to Pam, who I believe will be starting us off.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks to the Mars Chamber for having us today. We're very excited to do this presentation. Janelle and I have been working on the design to return to work for probably months now, gathering information. I am a corporate attorney in Porzio's corporate department. Janelle will introduce herself, but I have had the ability to work as general counsel for a large company over the past years before joining Porzio, which has given me both the inside counsel perspective and the outside counsel perspective. So I'm presenting to you a general counsel approach to your work plan. And the way we have designed today is to break this out into categories to help you hopefully touch on many of the issues that you have addressed in your company, in your business, whether it's a startup, mid-size, large-size company. You always need to assess your risk areas, determine your limitations, understand your legal requirements, refer to experts in the areas that you need to determine what that comprehensive plan is going to be. So hopefully we're going to be your experts today in the planning of your getting back to work. The first thing that we're going to look at is how we're going to assess our operational status and risk. What do we need to know in order to have an effective going back to work plan? The first thing we actually have is presented to us by our Governor Murphy. He has set out limitations for us that we have to operate under. It's interesting, I was just looking at some statistics today. 90% of the restaurant workers in New Jersey have been laid off. The restaurants in New Jersey constitute the majority of our employment workforce. So what does that mean right now? Because the next phase of returning to work limits restaurants, indoor dining, entertainment on hold, concert venues, gyms and fitness centers. We can only occupy 25% of the building capacity, or 50 people, whichever is less. At Porzio, although we have large office space, we are limited to 50 people. So we have sign-in procedures, we have temperature checks, we have advanced planning, we have done surveys of our employees, we have determined the needs of each of our employees. And there's a process in place that's consistently applied. To me, that's, as general counsel, I've always looked at creating those consistent applications and making sure that we can minimize whatever risk is out there. So what risk is out there with COVID? It's interesting. Look at the two formidable enterprises, McDonald's and Walmart. Recently, these two enterprises have been engaged in a series of litigation. The first case was Walmart. Walmart had an employee who unfortunately was diagnosed with COVID and passed away. His estate brought litigation against Walmart, claiming that they did not have the proper procedures in place to protect this employee. They didn't have training. They didn't have policies and procedures for asking questions regarding your health, for wearing face masks, for social distancing. This employee reported that he was ill to his supervisor and was then told to resume work. He went to the warehouse, he went home the next day, he passed away. So his estate brings claim against Walmart. Could that have been prevented? Most likely. Could Walmart have engaged in procedures and policies to prevent this type of situation? Well, what's happened since then is many other plaintiffs have filed claims for similar situations. McDonald's is an interesting case. Again, class action across the country, Chicago, Los Angeles. Plaintiffs have sued over unsafe COVID-19 related work conditions, claiming the burger giant failed to maintain OSHA requirements, social distancing guidelines, and advising employees when someone else contracted the virus. In California, there was an administrative action that was filed in the California Division of OSHA, and a general lawsuit claiming that the California OSHA actually failed to address the health and safety concerns. So those requirements were not broad enough. So you think about all the types of claims that are out there. People that are dealing with health risks are having families that are suffering, whether it's death or significant health claims. Insurance providers that need to be put on notice. Claims against insurance companies for not satisfying the claims. Enforcement of non-payment of perhaps it's rent, or it could be a license agreement or some other payment situation where payment delivery of the product could not be fulfilled or an event was canceled. So again, how do you protect this in this situation? I know my colleague Janelle will get into this in further detail, but for now, I'm going to give you some general advice. Let's look at your company as a whole. Where are you financially? What can you afford to do, and what can you do to protect your enterprise? Do you have the resources to pay for the COVID-19 equipment that is necessary? Do you have the resources to hire the experts that you need in order to protect your company as best to the company's ability? So my first recommendation is do that cash flow projection. Come into work with your financial person if you're a sole enterprise. Make sure that your books and records are in good shape and that you can project out over the next 6, 9, 12 months to secure your enterprise and the ability to pay for these necessary steps. As I said, Janelle will go into what is required, but for now, think about those limitations and what your budget is going to be. Fortunately, for most of you, I hope, you've taken advantage of the CARES Act. What has worked for your company? Well, we've had a lot going on in the last couple of months. We've had 3 programs, the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, which I'm sure everybody knows that mnemonic by now. The Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act, the PPPFA, and a new one coming on board, hopefully, to help those small and mid-sized businesses, the Prioritized Payment Protection Program. Which one of these works for you? Is it a combination, and how does this affect your business? If you have applied for the PPP and been given a loan by the SBA, the Small Business Administration, you may have already used those funds over the 8-week period and are now in a situation where you are applying for forgiveness. Luckily for you, there have been some recent interim rules that have made that application a little bit easier. I'll get into that in a little bit. But what's very important right now is the PPPFA has extended time for you, extended the cover period, so that if 8 weeks wasn't enough to take care of your employees and your payroll costs and the other covered expenses, you now have until December 31st, 2021 to take advantage of a PPP FA loan. The maturity date is interesting because I've advised clients, even if you don't have enough payroll because you haven't brought back your employees or you've had employees are still being furloughed, you only have X amount of payroll expenses. Hopefully that will meet the new criteria of 60% versus 75%. Look at that remaining 40% and see whether it will cover covered expenses such as your rent payments, your mortgage obligations. But if it doesn't, is it worth it to take it as a loan? It's a low interest 1% loan, and now you don't have to pay it back after 2 years, you have 5 years to pay it. And there's actually a 6-month delay by which you make the first payment under that loan. So it might be worth it for you to look at that cost benefit analysis of taking on that loan. I've also been advising clients to look at different loan programs. There's a Main Street lending program for companies, small to mid-sized companies, that is available and can provide extra comfort for the company. We also have some programs under the SBA and the EDA, the Economic Development Association. Those links can be provided by us if you would like more information on those different loan programs. So what's happening now if you have your employees ready to come back, but one, you're a restaurant, you can't do it. You can't have indoor dining. You are a gym and they're still being furloughed. Luckily, the PPPFA allows you more flexibility and allows you till December 31st, 2020 to rehire those employees. And if you don't have the ability to rehire them, it will give you a break in terms of getting that loan and possible forgiveness. So what happens with this new program, P4? It looks like it will be a good program for small to medium-sized businesses. It has not been signed off yet by the president. It is specifically mandated for hospitality and lodging businesses with multiple locations. It's supposed to give guidance and priority to businesses with 10 employees or fewer in processing. And it will require the SBA to take a hard look at the demographic information and loan recipients to make sure that it's equally applied, especially for those in need. Again, it will be for businesses of less than 100 employees, will include sole proprietorships and self-employed individuals. And you can show a 50% loss in revenue compared to the previous quarter. If you have received a PPP loan and have not used up all your available credit or on pace to exhaust that credit, you can still look to this new program. Again, it hasn't been approved, but there's hope out there that it will be available, and it's a great way to get additional funds, especially since we don't know where our marketplace is right now. Okay, let's move forward to the forgiveness aspect. The forgiveness aspect has actually gotten easier. The loan applications are shorter for forgiveness. They do spell out step-by-step analysis. It will allow you to work with your lender, which I do recommend you do. Please contact your lender, work with them on your forgiveness. There are some carve-outs now that were not there before. I also advise that you keep the money that you receive under these loans in a separate account so that when you do make your application for forgiveness, it's very clear what funds were earmarked for the PPP funds. Okay, as we look at again the general counsel approach, what other actions can you take? You really do need to look at what contracts you have. Take advantage of this time right now and review your key loan documents. See if your lender can work with you to perhaps give you a modification and help you with your mortgage payments on your business. Look at your leases and your lease payments, hoping that your landlord will work with you again for some kind of abatement or reduction in space. Anything from vendor contracts, insurance policies, make sure you look at your notice clauses, because under your insurance policies, you have key requirements for notification to your insurance carrier should you be seeking reimbursement for business interruption or any kind of loss. Make sure that you have an expert look at those insurance policies and see whether or not you do have a claim. There's something called an evergreen contract, which is a contract that renews itself, a perpetual renewal. This is the time for you to make sure you fulfill that notice requirement and terminate those evergreen contracts so they aren't renewing each year and costing you money. Event cancellations are the other one. Are you scheduled for that conference a year from now? Are you holding an event for your Christmas party? Look at those and see what is available. The key to this is your escape clauses. Is there a force majeure? Is there ability to terminate? Even if the language is not clear, I have been negotiating with the other party in this dire situation and working out ways to either abate the payments or terminate the contract altogether. So for those of you who have larger companies and you have boards, this is an interesting time. Under New Jersey law, we are allowed to have virtual board meetings, but what does that mean? There are key issues for the roles of each of the officers. You should really sign new confidentiality policies, make sure that even though you're virtual, that your participation in a board meeting is not heard by third parties. You should not be taping these board meetings. You should disclose to the board any extraneous situations or circumstances that are preventing you from having that privacy. Corporate documents should be revised to allow for your virtual board meetings if they don't already do so. You should have clear communication with your board members, allow a roll call. If someone is calling in, make sure that they announce their name. And for every vote, either a nay or a yay, to make sure that that is introduced by the board member, their name, and what their vote is. It becomes very complicated when the secretary, whoever the note taker is, can't see the person. And again, it usually is a hybrid situation where you have a combination of virtual and those that are on the phone call. So again, confidentiality, consistent communication with your board members, making sure that all the questions that are asked on the meetings are documented by the secretary or the note taker, distributing those minutes to the participants of the board meetings, and keeping a tape of the board meeting internally for 1 year. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to my esteemed colleague, because after all is said and done from the corporate perspective, there are a lot of things that we need to consider in terms of employees and getting the job done so that our employees are safe and healthy. Again, in the hope of minimizing risk, best practices for your business, and at the end of the day, having to make sure that you have secured your workplace to the best of your company's ability. We're going to now screen and stop share.
So good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with us a little bit today. I will tell you just a little bit about myself. I am, as Pam mentioned, a colleague of hers at Porzio, Bromberg & Newman. Next to the corporate practice, I work on employment law. So education and employment are my two areas of expertise. And in the employment arena, you can imagine that I'm doing lots and lots of work with helping companies, large and small, figure out what to do with their workforces. I want to give a little bit of a map that's going to go into some detail with many of the items that Pam kind of put on your radar so that you can really get going with the planning for reopening your physical workplace again. Now, I will say that the planning that I'm talking about is extremely preliminary. And the window is closing on you getting a lot of these things done because so many things need to be done. I'll just put them on your radar, and we can talk a little bit more about what those details are specifically. So when it comes to planning, you really have to start with figuring out who is going to be doing what. Those are the first two things. So who are the people that are involved in a team, which is a team that I would suggest be your COVID planning team. These are the folks who are going to be helping you not only come up with what needs to be done, but make decisions about those things and then see to it that those plans are subsequently implemented. I'm sorry, there's something about the sound. Is my sound not going through?
You're going through. I just spotlighted your video. That way we can see your face while we talk.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to have to look very carefully at who should comprise the members of your COVID planning team. Your COVID planning team should include a number of different individuals. It should include whoever the primary decision makers are within your facility. So it's your directors, your managers. If you have an executive director, you want that person involved because this is going to be decision-making time. It's going to involve your human resources because, you know, whether you have many employees or few employees, the employees are going to need to come back, and they're going to be coming back with all kinds of specific situations. Some of them are going to tell you, well, I can't come back because I live with my so-and-so and I don't want them to be exposed. Some will tell you, I can come back, but now I need these certain accommodations. Like, you know, I need time to address my childcare needs, or I need a schedule change to address those kinds of things. So your HR person is going to be critical in terms of membership on this COVID planning team. If you have an office space and you do a lot of your work via computer and telephone and internet, obviously you're going to have to involve your IT personnel to make sure that you can stay connected and your business can handle having everybody work remotely. That's what's been going on for some time, so I know you're aware of that, but the reality is we could be looking at a second wave in New Jersey where you're going to go back to working remotely. So it's important to continue to loop in your IT group and have them ready to shift at a moment's notice if in fact, you know, your office needs to go back to a remote arrangement. You certainly need to involve your facilities people. They're going to be key in getting whatever your workspace is ready for the next phase of whatever is to take place. So those are 4 key personnel members that you're going to need. They're not the only ones. You should also be thinking about involving your legal personnel. Now, if you're large enough, you might have your own in-house counsel. If you're not as large, large enough to have your own inside counsel, you should really consider having an outside attorney, a law office or law firm where you will have somebody on your team liaise with that attorney or that law office. Because as you've already figured out, there are tons of updates all the time. There are new laws, new edicts, both local and statewide and federal. Things are changing moment by moment, and you need to be abreast of all those changes because, of course, your compliance is expected. So your attorneys are going to habitually and necessarily be in the loop about all those things already. So they will be able to keep you up to speed on what changes are taking place as they're taking place. Third-party contractors are another sort of entity that you should think about involving, whether it's your business, your building managers and other folks like that who you'll have to loop in about the plans that you're making. Also your trade associations. If there are best practices that are industry specific that you need to know about and stay in the loop on, involve them. And then you'll have workplace, who I like to call adaptive workplace consultants. These are folks who will come in from the outside and help you to get your workplace ready. A position that has sort of risen to popularity in recent times is an industrial hygienist. This is a person who can help you get your workplace ready by figuring out, different policies and best practices that will deal with implementing measures that will reduce the exposure that your employees may have to harmful things in the workplace. So they help come up with these kinds of things and implement them. In terms of other third parties, I know for us at Porzio, we have Porzio Compliance Services. And within that compliance service team, we have a former head of Secret Service. We have the former head of disabilities, adult disability programs for the state of New Jersey. These are people who will help to keep your workplace safe. With our former head of Secret Service personnel member, he does a lot of work with helping companies to figure out how do you stay safe. What do you need to do with your building exits and entrances, and how are you going to manage compliance with whatever codes your building has and fire hazards and all the rest of it. Our disabilities consultant helps with that population of employees who are going to need their needs very specifically accommodated. Like, what if your employees need specialized PPE? You can't just hand him or her a mask because maybe they have a breathing condition, maybe they have a speech difficulty. There are adjustments that are going to need to be made, not just to PPE, but in the workplace. And so you want third parties to help you take a look at those things and figure out, what do I not know and how do I make sure that I'm prepared and my workforce is prepared. So those are some of the people who you need to either have on your team and the third parties who you should probably have consulting with your team to make sure that you come up with a robust plan for how do we get the workplace ready, who's going to be coming into the workplace, that kind of thing. The next consideration that you're going to have to make, so you've got your multidisciplinary COVID planning team. I suggest you come up with a catchier title for the team. But once your team is in place, you're going to want to start thinking about the two key tasks that your team needs to get done right away. One of those things is an employee survey. Now, you've probably heard anecdotally, one or more of your employees have reached out to you and said, oh, I expect to come back when you're reopening. Or they could have said the reverse. Oh, I don't think I'm coming back. I have somebody in my home who I don't want to expose to things. I just don't want to be exposed to anything. And so when you're getting this information kind of anecdotally, you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what does my workforce even look like? We suggest that you not rely on anecdotes and you actually figure out what your workforce is going to look like. So with that, you can come up with an employee survey where you're asking folks, who's coming back? And if you're coming back, when will you be back? And what do you have to say about sort of your availability if we need to stagger schedules or stagger days of the week in terms of working? Do you have any limitations that we need to know about in terms of childcare? Because you have the FFCRA and other laws that will allow your employees to continue to be out even though they're your employee. So you really have to start to gather information on those areas. Who's coming back? That can help you plan for PPE and what your scheduling arrangements are going to be, what accommodations they are going to need once they get back. If you have not furloughed your employees, you could still be looking at what accommodations they're going to need while they're still out, because there are employees who are reporting accommodation needs in the remote environment. And do you know about those? Because you're still obligated to meet them. So if your employee has, some sort of a visual impairment and they could do the big screen at their desk when he or she was in the office and now they're home on a tiny laptop, do you need to accommodate them? So your employee survey will really help you get a sense of, what does my workforce look like? What is it going to look like? What are the needs that those employees have that I'm going to be legally bound to accommodate? And you have to be careful with this survey because you're not just sort of asking everything in the world that you could want to know. How you ask questions and what questions you ask are going to be key and critically important. You don't want to ask seemingly innocuous questions like, are you disabled? Do you have a disability? What accommodation are you going to need based on, your diagnosis? Those kinds of questions are actually unlawful. So what we would suggest is when you sort of spend some time with your team and come up with the questions that you think are going to help you figure out, what your workplace is going to look like, what your staffing is going to look like, you should run that list by your attorney so that your attorney can flag for any inappropriate questions and make adjustments. For our clients, we've just gone ahead and made the surveys for them so that they won't run into these kinds of issues. So that's another thing that you're going to have to do, get attorney review on whatever you're getting ready to send out. In terms of the next major thing that you should get done, your building walkthrough, you should have that assisted by the third-party consultants that we talked about. Not just, the core members of your team, but have your securities expert, your facilities expert going to be on your team, but maybe your disabilities expert and the rest of, whoever you think can lend some some substance to the plans that you need to make, the industrial hygienist that you want to consult with. Go through your building and start to make plans about, okay, how are we going to get this place to be in a configuration where people can maintain social distancing? What are the kinds of, signage that we're going to need, and the floor mapping, the floor plan that we're going to have for how desks are arranged or things are set up? Are we going to close off our coffee rooms because we can't maintain sanitation in there given the amount of use spaces like that tend to get? And those other kinds of plans. So your third-party consultants will really be helpful in the building walkthrough. Other things that you're going to need. So your team is going to figure out what we're going to send out in a survey. We're going to line some people up to come in, take a look at our building with us, and figure out how we're going to map our building out. Once you've done that, you can start to focus on what I like to call the other PPP, and that is your policies, procedures, and protocols. Starting with your policies, you're going to have to update a number of policies. If you have a travel policy, that's one that you'll update. If you didn't have one before, you're going to want to have one now, because you really want to make sure that your travel policy includes a reporting requirement, right? We know that certain places right now are hotspots for COVID-19. Does your travel policy currently say that those employees of yours have to tell you when they've been to these locations? You're going to want them to, so that you can make a decision about whether you're going to allow them back into the workplace immediately or if you're going to request that they quarantine. You should also make sure that your travel policy has a pre-approval component for when people are choosing to travel. Some businesses are not going to have their employees travel at all, so you really just need, mandated reporting. Some businesses do have their employees going all over the place, whether it's locally or, within the state or, beyond. You want to make sure that you're taking a look at what those plans are that your employees have to travel before they actually leave and then get stuck somewhere for 14 days when they're coming back. So take a look at what your policy currently says about travel. Another one is going to be leave. Many of you are already aware that the FFCRA gives an allowance for leave, and your policy needs to be updated to reflect the leave requirements of the FFCRA that have to do with, somebody is going to figure out if they have COVID, they're going to be out for a diagnosis, or they do have COVID, or they've been told to quarantine by their doctor. Those are all going to be approved reasons to give them leave and to pay them while they're on leave. Child care concerns, those are, again, under the FFCRA, you're going to need to make sure that you're paying them for leave associated with reasons like that. A key thing I would say to check is your eligibility for compliance with the FFCRA. I had one client call some weeks ago and say, hey, Janelle, I just want to ask you if, this employee called us, this is the scenario, and should this be one of the employees that we give COVID pay to? And by that, they were referring to the FFCRA. And I said, wait a second, don't you have 800 plus employees? And the client said, yes. And I said, well, you don't have to comply with this. So up until that point, they've been giving away leave pay under a law that they didn't have to comply with. So preliminarily, check your eligibility for compliance under the relevant laws, and then you want to update your policy to reflect those arrangements. And then finally, your guest and visitor policy. We're no longer in the time where people can just sort of walk through your door in any number for any reason and do business with you. You really are going to be policing, so to speak, who's coming in and out of your building. So vendors, you're going to make sure that they're on notice that they should be, trying their best to schedule deliveries with you. They don't necessarily need to enter your building anymore. You should have your procedures in place for how you're going to vet visitors, if they get any access, to what extent they get access, depending on the purposes that they're there for. So all those should get a look to make sure that they have been updated appropriately. Policies that you're going to have to probably create would include some of these. I would suggest having a remote work policy as one that needs to be created, because I recently spoke to an audience of members of the American Bar Association, and with 500 attendees present, I did a poll and said, how many of you have return to work or remote work policies in your workplace? 50% came back and said they did not. And of course, that was at a time when everybody was working remotely. So you have to think about, well, if we don't have those kinds of policies in place, then, your employees can show up to you and say, hey, I've been working remotely for X amount of time. Can you reimburse me for using my own internet? Do you have a policy that says anything about that? Your employees could be attending, live Zoom meetings in, I've heard, pajamas. What does your remote work policy say about what they need to be wearing when they're going to Zoom meetings and representing your business? If you don't have a remote work policy, probably it says nothing. So you want to have a remote work policy that addresses things like reimbursement and dress code, and certainly that addresses other things like who's going to get to continue to work remotely. As we start to reopen, probably a good amount of your workforce is going to be on site, but as Pam indicated, not everyone. And so for the people who are going to continue to work remotely, what are the parameters for them to be allowed to do that? Many people have witnessed a spike in productivity since it seems like we're working all day and all night and into the weekend because we have, direct computer access right now. But some people haven't been as productive. That probably should be one of the criteria that you mentioned in your remote work policy, that you're going to be looking at who's been able to be productive during this period. And that's going to weigh into your decision as to whether you're going to authorize them to continue to work remotely as you reopen. So all of that should be in a policy like remote work. In terms of social distancing, we all know that we're supposed to be doing this. But what does that involve specifically other than just standing 6 feet away? You would be surprised because we have designed social distancing policies. I think the one that we created is a couple pages long. You want to be able to put your employees on notice of what the expectation is around social distancing when they come back. You're not going to be handshaking and hugging and greeting in person the way that we once did. Different things like that are very important to consider. Your employees need to know what are the specific parameters of social distancing. Is everybody going to be hovered around, the photocopying machine? Are we going to still be using certain spaces in the office, or have you decided to repurpose them? All those kinds of things are going to be reflected in your social distancing policy. And then emergency response plan. The CDC says you really need to have one of these. So prior to COVID, you probably didn't know about this. It didn't exist. So this is one that I think you're going to have to create. We've created these policies for our clients, but this emergency response plan is important because what if someone comes into your workplace? Many employers have asked us, someone comes in and leaves, they call us later on, they say, oh my God, I tested positive for COVID. Now you're thinking, well, what does this mean? What do I have to do? Do I have to tell people? Who can I tell? Am I allowed to tell people and identify this employee? What is going to happen with the rest of the workplace? I know I have to clean. Do I keep this person out? Do I have to, take these other steps? I know I've got to notify local health authorities. There are so many things that sort of get triggered once you find out that someone either has tested positive for COVID or is exhibiting symptoms in the workplace for COVID. You should also have a reporting requirement where if someone is exhibiting symptoms, he or she has to report it, whether those symptoms are exhibited at home or in the workplace. That will trigger a series of actions that you should take. So all that goes into your emergency response plan. How do you isolate this person? Where are you going to isolate this person? You've got to know all those things before you're faced with the situation where now someone is sick. So that's a policy that's very important to have ready to go. Now, separate from the policies, of course, you're going to have protocols. I talked to you a little bit about what one of the protocols might be in terms of within your emergency response plan. Think about having a hiring protocol that can be handled completely virtually. Probably you've already had to hire people since the closure first began. And if that's the case, were you able to streamline in a virtual format all aspects of that hiring process? Because again, you might be rehiring again soon when you find out from your survey that X% of your employees don't feel comfortable coming back to a physical workplace. So you're going to need to hire people. You might generally be hiring more custodial staff to help out with the cleaning that's going to have to take place at a far greater rate than it ever did before. So make sure that you have in place a hiring protocol that can be entirely virtual. One of the things you have to figure out, though, is within your the employees that you're now starting to hire, who has job descriptions that need to be modified. You might not be utilizing your staff in the same way that you were before, and you don't want to be faced with a situation where someone's coming to you saying, well, that's not really my responsibility. You want to look at your current job descriptions and make sure that they do reflect what you now need your employees to be doing, whether those are expanded cleaning responsibilities on everybody's part and all kinds of other COVID-related duties. You might want to plug those things in so that you don't have to deal with, someone coming to you and saying, well, I don't really think I need to be doing X, Y, and Z. Also think about modifying your employee contracts. Are you going to have to adjust the work hours, adjust the salary because of the additional work? There are all kinds of things that are standard in your employee contracts from year to year that you're going to have to reconsider and see if changes need to be made and if you need to commit your employees to very specific additional or different tasks. Another one is think about what you're going to do in terms of recalling folks when that time period comes up. Because when you start to recall your employees, you want to make sure that you do it based on criteria. It's not going to be, well, I really like Sue, or well, Mary called me and said she really needs the work, or she's bored at home. That's not going to be how you want to think about recalling people from furlough or getting people back who've been laid off. You want to have some standard criteria in there, whether it's going to be their prior job performance and evaluations, and things like that. You want to make sure that the criteria is objective, whether it's their longevity, how long people have been with you. You're going to recall those for folks first. You do not want to be hit with discrimination claims at the end of this. So make sure you've got a handful of standard criteria and that you apply it across the board for the people that you are calling back. Same thing holds true for building reentry. You don't want a situation where, oh, my entire custodial staff is people of color and those are the people that have to go back to the building and be there on site every day, and then everyone else doesn't have to come back. I hate to give an example like that, but if that is the arrangement that you could be faced with, you really want to reconsider. You really want to, again, have standard criteria for what you're doing. If one of the standard criteria is the specific tasks that a person has to do, maybe your IT people have to be on site. Maybe your office services people who check the mail and whatnot have to be on site. So it's based on job duties and not anything other than that. Job duties, longevity, different criteria that are objective. So separate from updating your hiring protocols, of course, at this point, you're going to need to have a protocol for checking the symptoms that your employees are coming into the workplace with. There are a lot of different sort of creative means that I've seen employed for this. Some people will have, iPads that people are sort of checking off if they've exhibited symptoms. I've now heard of an app that's been released where people can send you, the employer, the responses to the various questions about their travel and the extent to which they're exhibiting symptoms. If you choose to use any of the electronic means that are sort of off-site and then your employee shows up, we would recommend you do the additional due diligence check of at least a temperature check on site. The rest you can handle electronically, either on site or handle electronically, through an app or whatever other means, emailing, phone calling, things like that. But the symptom check is going to be important. And as an employer, one of the things that you have to be sure that you do is guard the medical data that you are starting to accumulate. You cannot have, any random employee accumulating, all of your employees' temperatures and their medical information and having regular access to that. So you and the COVID planning team need to be sure that you're coming up with, okay, well, how are we going to protect this data? Are we going to make sure everything's electronic and only these people have passwords? Are we going to keep it in a paper form, but we're going to store it in this locked location? You have that obligation to maintain privacy and security, so make sure that you have a plan for how you would do that. PPE use is another area where you're going to need a protocol. It's going to be important because I think right now a lot of employers were just concerned with having it, right? We want to make sure that we get it, we stockpile it, we have enough for our staff. And then, when the staff rolls in, you start to distribute it. That is not the limit of your PPP obligation. One of the things I want to make sure you're all aware of is that PPE is something that is regulated, and it's regulated through OSHA, meaning you need to comply with different activities in order to properly handle PPE. As an employer, it is your obligation to pay for the PPE. And when the PPE has been procured and is on site, it is your obligation to train your employees on the use and the use and the disposal that's the word I'm looking for, of the PPE. So you won't just hand them a mask and say, hey, make sure you have this on all day while you're here. You've got to tell them, this is how you put the mask on. This is where you need to put the 1 or 2 straps. You can't tuck it under your nose so you can breathe better and only have your mouth covered. You need to give all of that direction to your employees, and then you want to make sure they know what they should be doing in terms of getting rid of it. How long they should have it for. We're going to replace your mask every day you come in, you get a fresh one. Those kinds of things need to be gone over with your employees so that you've got proper and compliant PPE use under OSHA. And then there's the rollout. So now you've updated your policies, you've updated your protocols, you've stockpiled all these supplies, you're getting ready to open up. Do you have your employees just show up to the building and walk on in? I think not. You're going to want to make sure that you have let your employees know before they show up to work what the changes are that you've made. If your entrances have changed from what they used to be, they should know that before they get there. If you have policies in place that require them to go through certain things, they should know that before they get there. So we're going to suggest that whether you do that training virtually or you figure out another way to do it, you really want to make sure it happens before employees get there. Let them know, we didn't used to have a travel policy, we have one now, here's what it says. We didn't used to have an emergency plan for if someone had symptoms in the workplace, we have one now, here's what it says. All of that needs to be told to your employees. And then of course you want to expose them to when it comes to training, you want to have them sign off. A lot of employers have been asking us, well, can I just please have a waiver where every one of my employees signs off and says, when I come to work, I understand that I could catch COVID and I know I have no right to sue my employer for that. That is not what we recommend doing. There have been some industries where that's been attempted and met with incredible backlash. So from Porzio's perspective, that's not advice that we would recommend. However, because in any scenario, your best defense is going to be the reasonableness of the actions that you took in preparing your workplace and limiting the potential exposure and hazard that your employees were faced with, you're going to go ahead and do that anyway, but you should make sure that your employees are aware of it. So at some point, you and the team need to come up with a document, and certainly you can be assisted by your attorneys, that will explain, here are the measures that we have put into place, the steps that we have taken to ready this workplace, the things that we expect you to comply with in order to help everybody maintain safety. And we've also trained you on all of these things and have them signed off on the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement that you did all these things, they're aware of all the things that you've done, they're aware now that they need to comply with everything you've put in place. You've trained them to make sure that they know and understand all of this, and now they're signing off to say that yes, that is the case. Because now you can have some evidence of, look, you know what's happening and how we've chosen to do things here, and you can use that to help if you ever need to defend, as opposed to employee waive your rights, which probably not going to hold up in terms of waivers. And it's also something that's not really looked at well because it sort of absolves the employer of really making sure that the measures that would keep them safe are actually put into place. Once a waiver is signed, some employers just don't feel they'll have to do very much. And so you going ahead and taking all those reasonable measures and making them aware of it and having the proof that you've done that is going to be very good protection for you as an employer. So have your employees tour the building virtually if you can, whether you take them through, somebody's got their iPhone and kind of walks through, this is what we have, this is where you're signing in now, blah, 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 blah. Or you email them a new floor plan of this is how we have reconfigured the desks and whatever kinds of arrangements, giving them as much notice as possible on the changes that are going to be made or that have been made to the workplace is going to be very useful for helping you to have a smooth reopening when that time comes. So as I mentioned, Pam and I have been working a lot with our clients, large and small, to help them get ready. What we've offered you today are things that you need to do immediately if you haven't done them already, because we don't want that window to close on you and then suddenly you're looking to open and are in a scramble. So we are able to assist with any sort of advice, preparing any of these kinds of documents, asking us any questions you have in terms of unique scenarios. My employees said this to me about why they can't come in, or this to me about what accommodation they need. Do I have to pay them? How much do I have to pay them? all those kinds of things we can be available to assist you with. So there's our contact information, and one little present that we'll send you following this is a checklist. We have developed a pretty comprehensive checklist that lets you know a good amount of the things that we've talked about today and even more, so that you can really kind of go down and make sure that before your doors open again, you are ready to go and you've done everything you could to put yourself in the best legal position. So feel free to reach out.
I was also going to add, on our website, pbnlaw.com, we have a COVID website, and that contains a lot of articles, some of which Janelle and I have written, and that is updated periodically with news and bulletins that you might want to be aware of. Also, we can add you to our mailing list if you send us your information for that as well.
Okay, thank you both so much for this. This is really great information to put out there for employers, so I really appreciate you putting out this webinar for us. Just so everyone knows, I did drop their contact information in the Zoom chat as well as on the Facebook Live comments. So if you have questions after this webinar, please feel free to reach out to them there. I personally have a question just to start us off if anyone else has any other questions. Again, please leave questions in chat. How often are you seeing compliance guidelines limiting things like travel outside of the state or travel outside of the country?
So we're seeing them often, and we're suggesting that employers go ahead and have them. Now, you know, sometimes you want to look carefully at sort of what the updates are. You have to be on top of what are the latest hotspots. Like as of yesterday, I think Delaware was even added to the list of places where you're coming from there, you need to quarantine coming into our state of New Jersey. So the travel restrictions are real, they're serious, and they're something that employers have to really be on top of. So yes, we see the requirement to comply with the travel restrictions practically everywhere, because you know, you've done all this work as an employer to get your workplace ready. You really don't want to have a situation where someone sort of breaks in and out everyone goes again because now they've been exposed. It's very complicated, and it can be very costly resource-wise for employers if those restrictions are not honored and it results in someone getting sick.
Okay, thank you. So you would recommend following the guidelines put forth by the state, essentially?
Totally.
All right.
Yeah, we at Porzio have strict guidelines that we have to follow. One of our colleagues was in Florida on a business trip and had to quarantine for 2 weeks. So we just, you know, we keep posted on where everybody's traveling. They have a duty to notify us and then to self-quarantine.
Okay.
On an island for almost a month.
Yeah, we did.
You weren't allowed to come back.
They're allowed to come back. So. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions that anyone wants to leave in chat? I'm going to give people a moment. While I wait for that, I do want to let everyone know that we do have more webinars coming up. Tomorrow afternoon at noon, we have Pandemic Aftershock, What Now? How to Manage Through the Coming COVID-19 Recession. And then next week on Wednesday at noon, we have a Washington update with Representative Mikey Sherrill. So both of those events are free and they should be fantastic. So I hope I'll see you all there. So are there any questions? Let's see, Michelle did ask earlier, is a recording of this available? Just so you know, this will be available to watch again on our Facebook page, Morris County Chamber of Commerce, under videos. An edited recording will also be posted on our YouTube page and our website's video library. So if you want to refer back to this information, you could get it there. You can also reach out to Janelle and Pamela for the reopening checklist that they mentioned. So let's see. If there are no other further questions, oh, Larry says thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Do you guys have any closing comments?
We appreciate this opportunity and look forward to keeping you updated as we go through the process. Our checklist is evolving, and so perhaps a month from now, you'll hear from us again.
Thank you for your time, and we hope that this has been helpful to you. We tried to tailor a lot of what we discussed to be responsive to the things we know our clients are asking us from, the four corners, what do we have to do? So we are giving you the benefit of sort of their questions and hope that it suits your needs as well.
No, absolutely. Thank you both so much. This is great information, and we know that it's constantly updating, but now we know that we can refer to Porzio while we need updated information. So thank you to both. I will see you all on the next webinar, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Stay well.
Take care.